Most people think diners are comforting places, warm lights, fresh coffee, and friendly faces. But when the clock hits midnight, the world outside changes. The chatter fades, the coffee cools, and the ones who walk through those doors aren't always human. Tonight, we're stepping inside 3 real stories from people who work the graveyard shift. Places that should have been safe until something walked in and refused to leave. These are 3 horrifying, true diner horror stories. I used to work the night shift at a small diner off Highway 47, just outside a dying town in Arizona. We were one of those 24-hour spots, the kind that truckers, drifters, and insomniacs end up at when nowhere else is open. The neon sign outside flickered most nights, and the air always smelled faintly like burnt coffee and grease. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid my bills. I usually worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my coworker Lisa handled the register while I waited tables. Most nights were uneventful, quiet, predictable, and lonely. But there was one night that stayed with me ever since. And every time I pass that empty diner now, I still get chills thinking about the man in the corner booth. It was a Thursday, sometime in mid-February. The air outside was cold and dry, and hardly anyone was out that night. Around 2:30 a.m., the doorbell chimed, that little metallic ring that always startled me when the place was empty. A man stepped in. He was tall, thin, maybe in his 40s. He wore a faded brown trench coat and a black baseball cap pulled low over his face. What stood out most were his eyes, gray, almost colorless, and the way he stared straight ahead like he was looking through the walls. He didn't say a word. At first just sat down in the last booth near the window, the one that faced the road. When I came over, I tried to sound cheerful. "Hey there, what can I get you tonight?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring out at the road. Finally, in a low, calm voice, he said, "Just coffee. Black." I nodded, filled a cup, and brought it over. He didn't touch it. For the next hour, he just sat there, motionless, barely blinking like he was waiting for something. When Lisa went to check the register at around 3:30, she whispered, "Has that guy even moved?" I glanced over. He hadn't. Around 4, I finally walked over and said, "Sir, we close the dining area soon. Everything okay?" He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. "You ever see something you can't forget?" he asked, softly. I froze. "Excuse me?" He leaned forward just a little and whispered, "She's out there, waiting." Before I could ask what he meant, he stood up, left a $5 bill on the table, and walked out into the cold. I watched him cross the parking lot and disappear into the dark. That was weird, sure. But I'd seen worse. Drifters sometimes wandered in saying strange things. I brushed it off. He came back the next night. Same time, same booth. This time he didn't even order coffee, just sat down and stared out the window again. Lisa joked, "Maybe he's watching for UFOs." I laughed it off, but deep down something about him made me uneasy. Around 3 a.m., the phone behind the counter rang. I picked it up. There was static, and then a voice. "Tell him to stop watching." I froze. "Who is this?" More static. Then the line went dead. When I turned around, the man was looking right at me. I hadn't seen him move, but now his gray eyes were locked on mine. I forced a smile, set the phone down, and went to refill a trucker's cup at the counter. When I looked back at the booth, he was gone. No doorbell chime, no sound, just gone. The only thing left behind was that same $5 bill. Same fold, same tear near the corner. By the 3rd night, Lisa refused to work past midnight, so it was just me and the cook, George, in the back. At exactly 2:31 a.m., the bell chimed again. I didn't need to look. I already knew it was him. He walked in, slower this time. His coat looked damp, like he'd been out in the rain. But it hadn't rained all week. He sat at the same booth. I didn't even ask if he wanted coffee. I just poured one and set it down. This time, though, I noticed something different. His reflection wasn't visible in the window. I blinked, leaned closer, but the glass only showed the empty booth. He turned his head slowly toward me, smiled, faintly, and said, She can see you now. My stomach dropped. What? He motioned toward the window. I turned, and for just a second, I saw something move outside. A figure, pale, standing by the road. When I looked again, it was gone. Whispered, "Don't look again." Then he stood up and walked toward the restroom in the back. Minutes passed. 10, 15. I finally went to check, but when I opened the restroom door, it was empty. The window was too small for anyone to fit through. The door had been locked from the inside, and sitting on the sink was another $5 bill. Damp, torn, same as before. The diner started feeling wrong. Cold spots would appear in the aisles. Sometimes the lights would flicker when I passed that booth. Even George started noticing. He told me once, "You ever feel like someone's sitting there even when it's empty?" We both laughed, nervously, but deep down we knew it wasn't a joke. One night, about a week later, I was closing up alone when the power cut out. Everything went dark except for the faint glow of the neon sign outside. I used my phone's flashlight to check the fuse box in the back. That's when I heard it. The bell at the front door. I froze. The door was locked. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the aisle. "Lisa!" I called out, even though I knew it wasn't her. The footsteps stopped right behind me. Then that same calm, low voice whispered, "She's inside now." I turned around, and there he was. But his eyes, they were completely black. He smiled, and then the lights flickered back on, and he was gone. The door was still locked. The booth was empty. But on the table, there was a coffee cup, steaming hot, and beside it, another $5 bill. A month later, the diner shut down. They said it was for renovations, but the truth was simpler. No one wanted to work nights anymore. Truckers started saying they saw someone standing by the road out front, a tall man in a brown coat. Sometimes alone, sometimes with a woman in white standing behind him. When the diner finally reopened under new management, I stopped by one afternoon just to see it. New paint, new booths, everything modernized. But when I looked toward the corner near the window, there was still an old coffee stain on the table. And right in the center of it, taped under the edge of the seat, was a faded $5 bill. The waitress said, "Oh yeah, we found that when we were cleaning. Weird, right? No one could peel it off." I smiled politely, but inside, I was shaking. Because when I looked closer, I noticed something scribbled faintly on the bill, in smeared black ink, barely visible. "She's still waiting." I used to work as a line cook at a small 24-hour diner called Miller's. It sat off Route 19, the kind of highway where the gas stations close by 10 and the billboards are so faded you can't even read them anymore. Most nights were quiet. We got the usual crowd, truckers, night shift nurses, and the occasional drunk who needed somewhere to sober up before sunrise. But there's one night I can't shake, no matter how much time passes. And it started with a phone call we never should have answered. It was a Friday night about 1:45 a.m. Rain was hammering the roof and thunder rolled every few minutes like distant explosions. The waitress on duty, Amber, was wiping down the counter while I finished cleaning the grill. We were supposed to close for cleaning at 2 a.m. and reopen at 4, but sometimes if someone came in right before lockup, we'd let them sit. You don't turn people away in the middle of a storm, not in a place like ours. The front door was all glass, and every time lightning flashed, you could see the rain flooding the parking lot. I remember glancing out and seeing nothing but my own reflection in the dark. That's when the phone rang. Amber jumped. It was loud in that silence. She picked up, said her usual, "Miller's Diner, open all night. How can I help you?" Then she frowned. Sir, we don't do takeout this late. The kitchen's closing in 10 minutes. She paused, then slowly turned toward me. Her expression changed. Confusion, then unease. "What do you mean you're already outside?" Looked toward the window and my stomach dropped. There was a man standing there. He wasn't under the awning. He was just standing in the rain, motionless, completely drenched. He wore a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. But the strangest thing was his posture. Stiff, unnatural, like he wasn't really alive. Amber hung up the phone slowly. "Did you see him move?" she whispered. I shook my head. The thunder cracked again, and for a second the lightning lit up his face. He was smiling, but his lips didn't look right. They were stretched too wide, like his face couldn't contain the grin. Amber backed up. "Should we lock the door?" I nodded. She reached for the latch, but before she could touch it, the bell over the door chimed. He was already inside. Neither of us had seen the door open. He was just there, standing a few feet away, water dripping from his coat. The puddle beneath him spread across the linoleum. Amber's voice trembled. "Sir, we're about to close." He tilted his head, that grin never fading. "Then I guess I'm just in time," he said softly. His voice sounded wrong, like it came through a speaker. He walked to the farthest booth and sat down, coat still dripping. I exchanged a look with Amber and she mouthed, "Call someone." But my phone had no signal. Neither did hers. Storms like this always knocked out reception. Amber grabbed a menu, tried to compose herself, and went over to take his order. I watched from the kitchen doorway. He didn't look up when she approached. His hat shadowed most of his face, but from where I stood I could see his hands, pale and thin, fingers trembling ever so slightly. "What can I get you tonight?" she asked, her voice shaking. He finally looked up. His eyes were pitch black. Amber froze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he whispered, "Coffee, and a slice of cherry pie." She nodded, turned quickly, and hurried back to the counter. When she reached me, her voice was barely a whisper. "His eyes, did you see them?" I nodded. They looked empty. I poured the coffee, plated the pie, and handed it to her. When she turned back to the booth, he was gone. The booth was empty. The door hadn't opened, but on the table sat a half-empty cup of coffee, steam still rising from it. And beside it, a small tape recorder. We stared at it for a long moment before Amber finally reached out and pressed play. At first, all we heard was static. Then faintly, a man's voice, like the same calm, distorted tone. "The diner's empty now, but the coffee's still warm. She'll be here soon. She always comes back for the pie." Amber hit stop, hands trembling. "What the hell was that?" I looked around, my chest tight. "Maybe it's a prank," I said. But I didn't believe it. She whispered, "Listen." In the distance, we could hear the faint hum of a car engine, outside, in the storm. But when I looked through the window, there was no car, just the empty parking lot. We decided to close early. Amber locked the door while I shut off the fryers and wiped down the grill. It must have been 15 minutes later when we heard it. Again, a click, then another. The sound was coming from the counter. The tape recorder was playing by itself. "Don't leave yet. She's not done eating." Amber screamed and backed away. I grabbed the recorder and slammed it against the counter. It stopped. But when I looked back toward the booth, the coffee cup was full again, and sitting beside it was another tape. Amber refused to touch it. She grabbed her coat and said, "I'm not staying here another minute." I didn't blame her, but when she reached the door, she froze. Her breath hitched and she whispered, "Oh my God." Standing on the other side of the glass was a woman, soaked, hair plastered to her face, eyes wide and white as bone. She looked furious. Amber stumbled back as the woman pressed her hand against the glass, leaving behind a streak of dark red. Then, in a blink, she was gone. The lights flickered, the coffee machine hissed, and the radio in the corner turned itself on, playing the same static-filled voice. "You shouldn't have taken her order." Amber ran to the back, grabbed her phone, and tried to call 911. I stayed in the kitchen doorway, too terrified to move. The tape recorder clicked again and started playing. "One leaves, one stays. That's the rule." Amber's phone slipped from her hand. The line was filled with the same static, and then the doorbell chimed again. I turned toward the booth. The man was back, but this time the woman was sitting across from him. She wasn't eating the pie. She was staring straight at Amber. Her face looked wrong, pale, stretched, her mouth trembling. Then she whispered something. But it didn't sound like a voice. It was a rasp, almost mechanical. Amber backed away, screaming. The man looked at me and said softly, "It's her shift now." Then the lights went out. When the sun came up, the police found me sitting outside in the parking lot. I don't remember how I got there. Amber was gone. Inside the diner, everything looked normal, except for one thing. In the booth, there were 2 untouched cups of coffee, and between them, a single tape recorder. The tape was labeled Final Order. When they played it, all they heard was the sound of rain, and faintly, a woman's voice whispering, "Table. For one, please." The police searched for Amber for months. No trace, no car, nothing. Miller's Diner shut down that same year. A few years later, I drove by the old building. The windows were boarded up, the sign rusted and half fallen. But when I slowed down at the intersection, I swear I saw someone sitting inside. A man in a dark coat and hat, smiling through the broken glass. And next to him, a woman with long, wet hair staring right at me. The lights flickered once and then they were gone. I worked nights at a small diner off Interstate 90 called Rosie's Place. Nothing fancy. 5 booths, a jukebox that hadn't worked in years, and the same smell of bacon grease clinging to everything. It was peaceful most nights. Quiet enough that I could hear the fridge hum and the clock tick. Except for booth number 5. No one ever sat there, even when the diner filled up. One night I asked Rosie why. She just said, "Some folks think that booth's bad luck." Then she walked away. A stormy Wednesday around 1:30 a.m., the doorbell jingled. A tall man stepped in wearing a soaked army jacket, hood up. He didn't look at me when I greeted him. "Is the booth by the window open?" he asked. I nodded, and he went straight to number 5. When I handed him a menu, he said, "Just coffee, no refills." He didn't drink it. He just sat there staring into the black parking lot. Once in a while, he lifted his hand like he was waving at someone outside. Next night, same time, same booth. When I poured his coffee, he said quietly, "You remember me?" "Sure," I said. Hard to forget someone who likes cold coffee. He smiled a little. "She still hasn't come in yet." "Who?" He didn't answer, just turned toward the glass. Every few minutes his lips moved like he was whispering to someone I couldn't see. At 3 a.m. he stood, left at 10 and murmured, "She's late again," before disappearing into the rain. The radio the third night. The diner was empty. I was refilling his cup when the old radio behind the counter hissed to life. It hadn't worked in years. Through the static came a woman's voice. "Tell him I can't come in tonight." I froze. The man turned slowly, eyes wide. "Did you hear her?" he whispered. I nodded without meaning to. He smiled faintly. "She always finds a way to talk." Then the radio went dead. The next evening, curiosity got the better of me. "Is she your wife?" I asked. "She was," he said, pulling a faded photograph from his jacket. A woman in her 30s smiled from that same booth number 5. "She died right here," he said. "Car accident out front. I was supposed to meet her. She never made it inside." He looked toward the window. "But sometimes when the rain hits the glass just right, I still see her reflection." Friday the storm came back worse than ever. Thunder rattled the windows, neon lights flickered red. He entered drenched but smiling. "She's close tonight." When I tried to pour his coffee, he caught my wrist. His hand was freezing. "Sit," he said. "She'll want to see you too." Something in his voice made me obey. I sat across from him, heart pounding. Rain hammered the glass. And then a face appeared in the reflection. A woman's face. Eyes blank, mouth moving silently. The man whispered, "She made it." For a moment I thought it was headlights, until dark liquid began to drip down the glass. Not rain, thicker. Then the figure was gone. The man stood, smiling sadly. She's not alone anymore. He walked out into the storm and never opened the door. When the sun rose, I told Rosie everything. She went pale. 5 years ago, she said, a trucker and his wife came here every Friday. He was running late one night, fell asleep at the wheel right outside, hit her car, killed them both. She looked toward the window. People say when it rains you can see them sitting together again. Weeks later, around 2 a.m., I came in, early for the morning shift. The diner was dark except for the buzzing neon sign, and there he was, sitting in booth number 5, coffee cup in front of him. He looked up and smiled. She said, "Thank you. I thought you were gone?" He chuckled softly. She kept her promise. He placed the photograph on the table, whispered, "Now she can rest," and walked toward the door. He didn't open it. He just faded through the glass like mist. When I blinked, he was gone. Only the photo remained. In it, the man and woman sat together smiling, and in the faint window reflection behind them stood a third figure. Me. A month later, Rosie's place closed for good. The wiring was fine, but during every storm, the lights near booth number 5 flickered. Locals say you can still see 2 silhouettes in that booth, talking softly while the rain runs down the glass. Last winter, I drove past. The sign was broken, windows, dusty, but the red open light still blinked faintly. For a second, I saw them. The man, the woman, and a third shape walking by with a coffee pot. I pressed the gas and didn't look back.